Redditors who clean up crime scenes, what's the most bizarre thing you've witnessed? Crime scene cleaner here. My first suicide cleanup was quite an experience. Man shot himself in the head in his garage. I'll never forget needing to use pliers to pull teeth and skull fragments out of the drywall behind where he sat, or that blood and brain managed to make its way more than 50 feet across the garage. Most disturbing though was his pickup. We chose to take it to our company wash bay to pressure wash it and make sure it was as clean as possible. I cleaned it myself, and was satisfied that I had done well. Inspected for blood and couldn't find anything, so I began driving it back to the owner's garage. On the way back a slight drizzle began and switched on the wiper blades. Imagine my horror as a chunk of brain streaks across my newly cleaned windshield. I pulled over quickly and cleaned it up, but it still makes me sick to think what would have happened if it didn't rain that day. This man's poor wife or daughter would have been met with that sight and been crushed again by the impact of suicide. That 10 years ago and I'll never forget it. Now I triple or quadruple check every job. My younger brother died by shotgun suicide 6 months ago. While I'm beyond thankful I didn't see the aftermath, my mind wanders to some pretty dark places wondering how bad it must have looked. Morbid, I know, but grief will influence you in strange ways. Reading your comment was oddly healing? I don't know if that's the right word. Closure-inducing? Not sure how to word it, but wanting to know his final state likely stems from the things concerning the situation that he'll never have answers to. At any rate, I'm grateful for people like you who do what suffering families cannot. Thank you for choosing this line of work. It's sadly needed and profoundly appreciated. I'm so sorry for your loss, but I'm glad to hear this discussion has had a positive impact on you today. Often it can be a thankless profession, and I'm overwhelmed by the amount of people who responded with positive feedback, including yourself. I hope you find closure and peace soon. Thank you. Not to sound fatalistic, but with suicide loss, that rarely happens. Despite the efforts of well-intentioned individuals offering up sentiments such as, "At least he isn't suffering anymore, I will never find peace in this loss." It was far too preventable. He'll never find closure either, as closure stems from answers, and I'll be living the rest of my life with unanswerable questions. However, I've recently joined forces with other loss survivors part of this horrible club, and together, through a podcast, speaking engagements, community events and outreach, blogging, vlogging, and hopefully one day, a book, I will at least have a mission in life. I wasn't able to save my brother as I never knew the battle he was secretly fighting. But I can help others, and encourage them in all the ways I never got the chance to encourage Rob, and chip away at the unnecessary yet still rampant social stigma surrounding brain health. And that's not nothing. Thank you again for the compassion behind the work you do. It shines even on Reddit. I don't clean up crime scenes, but I do remove the deceased. I can get into more accurate detail of the deceased, but here's some general stuff. Hoarders are a lot more common than they really should be, first of all. And it's never a clean hoard. It's piles of junk covered in several types of urine, shit and vomit. Molds I've never seen before, and probably insects that haven't even been discovered yet. I understand when the emergency services don't want to be in that kind of house longer than they have to, but I'll never forget having to ask them to help me because I couldn't distinguishing what was actually the deceased, and what was just a piles of random shit that looked more human than the deceased did. People will warn you bodies will bloat, and touching them the wrong way will make them leak. But the image you're conjuring up doesn't even hold a light to what it can be like. Insects skittering when you delicately lift a 400 pounds deceased onto your cot, because one wrong move and they will start oozing. Oh, and the ones who had pets who were so desperate they had to eat their owner. Staring into the eyes of a big, brown-eyed mutt who is happy to finally receive human contact, and all you can't think about is how the deceased is missing their entire face. Poor things were just hungry, but it's unsettling. My job is to clear landmines. I clean war crimes, you can say, yay, bit of a stretch, I know. #X200B, recently a cow had walked into a minefield in our area of operations, and stepped on a small anti-personnel mine. However, this mine was boosted by having been buried on top of a directional fragmentation mine, gamers and soldiers, think Claymore, but bigger. The cow had literally been split in half, with cow intestines spread all over the area and hanging from trees like Hannibal's Christmas ornaments. Edit, love the puns 3. Cow intestines spread all over the area and hanging from trees like Hannibal's Christmas ornaments. Lovely. Just lovely. Does anyone know where the brain bleach is? Ray bleach. Rappy cow gifs. Too soon. Family member did heavy-duty cleaning including crime scenes. A guy shot his head off with a shotgun. Imps were supposed to pick him up, literally, but missed a large chunk of brain behind a couch. That was when said family member decided to find other engagement. I can relate to this. Femmed. Respond to suicide with a rifle. He dead, nothing for us to do but pronounce. Cops cover the body, then want to escort the family out of the death scene because everyone is processed like a crime scene regardless, and it is the only way in or out of the property. Before they did so, though, my partner had to point out the guy's remarkably intact brain just sitting in the tree over his body. Another one just came to mind. Drunk driver hits a tree, wasn't wearing his seatbelt and was ejected. Well, most of him anyway. His leg remained in the car while the rest of him departed it. One of only 2 traumatic amputations of major limbs I've seen survive, fingers and toes all the time, legs, no. We were called to return to the scene after delivering him to the hospital because the cops didn't know what to do with his leg. And before anyone asks, no, there was absolutely no chance of reattachment. In fact, the challenge was figuring out how to get it out of the car it was trapped in. Don't drive drunk, boys and girls. And for crying out loud, wear your goddamn seatbelts. All the morons going it'd rather be thrown clear obviously haven't seen what happens to the people who are. We see it all the time. Really ducked up for life people if they survive, but most don't. I occasionally work on the weekends for a funeral home. It's decent money for what is essentially 2 hours of call-out work when their normal staff is off. Last year I was called in at around 5 in the morning. A 30-something-year-old guy had killed himself, shot himself, in a pretty small 2-bedroom apartment. That wasn't the bizarre part at all since I've seen it before on call-outs. What was bizarre was what was in the apartment. Literally thousands of documents, piled on the floor, on a desk, on shelves, of people's financial information. Credit card statements, bank statements, personal data, etc. Probably 3,000 folders with all this stuff in it. Even where there weren't piles of folders, there were just loose papers, magnetic cards, surveillance cameras. It was just the weirdest thing I've ever seen. And of course, some of these documents and folders had blood and brains spattered all over them. Didn't matter to me though since the detective on scene had said it was fine to take the body. The police had to clear a path by collecting the papers from the route we would take from the door to the apartment to where he was. A couple of months later, it came out that the guy had over $1 million in cash and Bitcoin. Apparently the state police were onto him. My best friend used to have this job. Most of the bizarre stuff was cleaning up suicides. Found a guy's full intact mustache across the room when he blew his head off with a shotgun. One guy tried to kill himself by shooting his stomach with a small caliber pistol. He didn't die immediately, so he wrote tons of whacked out stuff on the walls with his blood, then finished the job. One guy tried to kill himself by shooting his stomach with a small caliber pistol. He didn't die immediately. A similar thing happened near where I grew up. Guy got dumped, so he showed up at the ex's house when her parents weren't home. She didn't open the door, so he shot himself in the stomach. He apparently alternated between yelling at her and shooting himself. He had to reload before he finally passed away. My dad answered a call about a guy who killed himself in a playground. He shot himself 6 times in the head. Dad said no one would believe it was suicide if there hadn't been dozens of horrified people around watching. How the heck? You can take a lot of brain damage if you miss the really important bits like the brain stem. That dude who had an iron rod through his brain and the chickens who lived with their heads cut off come to mind. Phineas Gage and Mike the Chicken was dispatched to a vehicle versus pedestrian call a couple months ago, and when we arrived on scene it was like something out of a movie. Dude was running across a fairly busy 4-lane road and was hit by a car traveling about 55 miles per hour. After his head went through the windshield of the first vehicle, he then proceeded to be thrown into the opposite lane and was ran over and dragged about 20 yards by another vehicle. Once the coroner was on scene with traffic investigations, we proceeded to pick up his organs bit by bit. It was a fantastic anatomy lesson. And that is why you should not jaywalk in a nutshell. The versus makes it sound like a pedestrian ever has a chance. I like to remain positive. Smile. A SAR team op, propane not gas explosion. Guy's arm was holding onto a ladder going up a holding tank. No body. No anything. Just an arm. Preemptive edit, it was his left arm. So the arm was left? Right. This isn't right. I guess he wasn't alright. What are you talking about? He had no left arm. He was definitely all right from that point forward.